Have you ever considered that we are living in a unique time, that something world-changing is about to happen, and that it might concern you? If so, you're in the right place. Keep listening, and you'll hear thought-provoking views behind the news that point to a new and better future for all. Many people now sense that humanity is not alone. So consider this. If the Christ or the Buddha walked among us today as modern men, would we recognize them? What would they be saying? And most importantly, would we listen? Every Sunday on this program, Share International Radio, we'll examine extraordinary events that are unfolding behind the headline news. This may be the message of hope you've been waiting for. And now, welcome to this week's show.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of Share International Radio. This is your co-host, Diana Gold Holland, broadcasting from Vancouver in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. Cielito Pascual will be back in a couple of weeks. Now, if you've listened to some of our previous shows, you will know that we offer thought-provoking views behind the news, and this in relation to the presence of great teachers emerging now onto the world scene, headed by the world teacher Maitreya. You can check out these programs on our website, shareontheairradio.org. For this week's show, let's start with a bit of background. I've been a volunteer correspondent for Share International magazine since its inception in 1982. The magazine is produced 10 times a year under Chief Editor Benjamin Creme in London, England. There are abridged versions in 5 languages, and the publication is read in over 70 countries. Among other things, it tracks the process of the teacher's emergence onto the world scene and shows how their priorities for a safer and saner life for all are being implemented now all over the world, by the people, for the people, from the grassroots up. The amazing thing about Share International is that it carries no advertising and is produced 100% by volunteers. Only the printer gets paid. And yet the magazine is still going strong over 30 years later. You can subscribe to it at a modest cost, and you can check out the monthly abridgment free on the website www.share-international.org. That's www.share-international.org. My guest today is Monte Leach, the U.S. editor of Share International, who's based in San Francisco. He, too, has long been involved in Share International endeavors, and he has done much public speaking on the emergence of Maitreya. Please join me in welcoming my good friend and colleague, Monte Leach. Hi, Monte.
Hey, Diana. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be on the show.
Absolutely. So, Monte, let's start with a little bit about your background and how you got involved in the work you're doing now.
Well, it was way back in 1981 when I got started, when I was a mere lad. And it actually got started in a bookstore in Berkeley, California. And I came across a book called The Reappearance of the Christ and the Masters of Wisdom. And the author was Benjamin Creme. Now, the title of the book really didn't interest me that much, as I wasn't, and I'm really still not, a very religious person, but I was somehow really drawn to the book, and as I read through it, I was really amazed at its content, because it combined 2 areas that were really keen interests of mine. One was the spiritual or metaphysical, and the other were the issues of economic and social justice. Now, at the time, I had a really strong interest in so-called metaphysical or spiritual teachings of various types. And I'd also been interested and involved with social and economic justice issues, including the problems of global hunger and poverty. So finding a book that not only contained what I considered to be really profound spiritual wisdom, but one that grounded that wisdom in practical humanitarian needs of humanity, that really had a big impact on me.
Yeah, I'm sure, Monty, that a lot of our listeners will be very much in line with that thought process and even that experience of having a book drop off the shelf, for example.
I mean, it practically did, and I couldn't put it down. And so when I began reading it, I found out things that I never knew before, like the existence of the Masters of Wisdom, for example, a group of enlightened spiritual teachers who have lived in the remote mountains and the deserts of the world for countless millennia, who have helped and protected and inspired humanity, really overseeing the evolution, the progress of humanity from behind the scenes. All this unknown to most people. And that made so much sense to me because I just figured that we would not be just left to fend for ourselves and somehow struggle forward as humanity, that we have help, and that we have always had help of a spiritual kind throughout history to guide us forward. So that to begin with made a lot of sense to me. And also found out from this book that at the center of this group of enlightened teachers is the most senior member of this group of Masters of Wisdom, the master of all the masters, the world teacher, whose name is Maitreya.
Let me spell that for our listeners. That's Maitreya.
That's exactly it, Maitreya. Exactly. And the interesting thing is the Masters of Wisdom were actually written about in the late 1800s by a woman named Helena Blavatsky, who founded the Theosophical Society and lived and worked with a group of these masters for 3 years in the Himalayas, and she wrote several books about the teachings of these great Masters of Wisdom. And then some years later, between 1919 and 1949, an Englishwoman named Alice Bailey presented to the world more of the teachings of the Masters of Wisdom through a series of books that were dictated to her by one of the masters. And interestingly, one of these books by Alice Bailey, which was dictated to her by one of the masters, it was called The Reappearance of the Christ. And it was published in 1948, and it said that the masters and the head and leader of the group of masters would return to the everyday world sometime after the year 1975. So the book I was reading, which was published in 1980, called The Reappearance of the Christ and the Masters of Wisdom, was written by Benjamin Creme, who described in the book his direct training over the course of many years by a Master of Wisdom. And Benjamin Creme was actually confirming in the book that indeed, as had been predicted in the Alice Bailey book in 1948, that the Masters of Wisdom and their head and leader Maitreya, the world teacher, were emerging into the everyday world at this very critical time for humanity to live, to work among us, and to inspire us and teach us directly.
So this is right in line with those writings that go back to the late 1800s, as I recall.
Exactly. This is the work of Benjamin Creme in making this information known to the world. Really is part of a tradition, a long tradition that goes back, like you were saying, back to the 1880s, that when we first found out publicly about the existence of these great teachers.
Okay, so Monty, let's tell us why are they returning at this time?
Well, at this point, one thing I did want to mention, that if I do have time, a couple of things that really impressed me about the book, and I'll get to your question in just a couple of minutes, but
sure.
The book had a very strong impact on me, and one of the reasons was that Maitreya is not a religious teacher or leader, and that he's not here to found a new religion. And he fulfills the expectations of the various religious groups for their awaited teacher, whether the Christians wait for the Christ, and the Jews the Messiah, and the Buddhists wait for Maitreya Buddha. And all the religions await the coming or the return of their teacher, but Maitreya comes for all people, religious and non-religious alike. And his central concern, which was, really important to me to read about, that his central concern was not religious. It was really to help us rid the world of hunger and poverty and war, and really to show us how to live together in peace so that we don't destroy the world. And as someone like me who was non-religious, though a spiritual seeker and someone working on social and economic justice issues, I was really profoundly moved by this book, and it had a profound impact on me, as did hearing Benjamin Creme speak for the first time.
What was that like?
It really confirmed the wisdom of what I'd read in his book, but it was having a direct experience of that, hearing that in person, was very powerful experience for me. And after that, I began working with the local Share International group of volunteers. As you mentioned, we're all volunteers. It was part of an international network of groups and who make known the information. And a little bit later on, I began writing for Share International magazine, and as I had some experience as a journalist. And then several years later, I became U.S. editor of Share International, still a volunteer. As you mentioned, we're all volunteers. And even Benjamin Creme is a volunteer after all these many years. So that's kind of, in a not so small a nutshell, kind of how I became involved and why I became involved and why this really, means and meant, so much to me and had such an impact on my life.
Okay, let me mention the publication again and the website, www.share-international.org, where you can read the abridged version of the magazine. Monte, we're going into a break fairly soon.
Yes.
And when we get back, I'd like to have you talk to us a bit about what Maitreya's teachings and concerns are as he emerges.
Absolutely.
Okay, meet you all on the other side of the break. Hang in there.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
The Awakening of Humanity by Benjamin Creme is a concise, prophetic book about momentous changes soon to occur. It focuses on an unprecedented event, the emergence into full public life of Maitreya, the world teacher. Download the book free online. Visit shareontheairradio.org. That's shareontheairradio.org. shareontheairradio.org.
The name is Bond. James Bond.
No, the name is Joe. The Joe Show. And we are returning back for our 9th season here on OMTimes Radio. So tune in every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, on OMTimes.com/mobile. You can take us wherever you go. Yeah!
As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
If you've ever said, I do want it all. I do want happiness. I do want love. And I do desire the happily ever after fairy tale life, then this show is for you. Join me, Dame Nicole Brandon, for my internationally acclaimed show, Bridal Talk Radio, every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, where I'll bring you the top experts in the fields of communication, money, relationships, finance, pleasure, play, travel, sexuality, parenting, real estate, adventure, comfort, care, passion, and love.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Share International Radio here on OMTimes Radio. Share International Radio. My name is Diana Gold Holland, and I am here with our guest this week, Monte Leach, the U.S. editor of Share International magazine. Welcome back, Monte.
And thanks, Diana. I'm still here.
Okay. As we went into break, you're going to speak with us about what Maitreya's teachings are and his concerns as he emerges more and more onto the world stage.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Maitreya has said those who look for him as a religious teacher will not recognize him, actually. That he says he is an educator. He comes as an educator in the broadest sense of that word. He really comes, I think, as I mentioned before, he comes to show us how to live together in peace, he says. And he says the key to doing that is sharing.
Okay, so what is this sharing and why do we need it?
Well, if we look at the world today, what do we see? We see about 20% of the world's population, mainly those of us living in the developed world, using and wasting 80% of the world's food and resources, according to the UN. So that leaves about 80% of the world's population, mainly those in the developing world, having to make do with less than 20% of the world's food and resources. So as a result, more than 20,000 people, mainly children, are dying every day from hunger-related causes. And these are deaths that could easily be prevented because the world produces more than enough food for everyone, about 10% per capita surplus of food. And so while the number of poor and sick and hungry people are increasing, so are the number of very wealthy people increasing. And this growing divide between the wealthy and the poor threatens us all. It's not just a humanitarian issue, although it's a profound humanitarian issue. It's even more than that, because so many of our critical problems that we're facing in the world are caused, at least in part, by the fact that so many of our brothers and sisters around the world lack the basic necessities of life and lack even the hope of obtaining these necessities. So given this situation, no wonder we see these increases in social unrest and civil war around the world, the massive migration of people around the world that we're seeing, the rise of fanatical terrorist groups. Those living in poverty, those who are desperate, who have no hope, are more likely to be drawn into these terrorist groups. And even one of our most serious problems, environmental degradation, is related to this economic divide, because the richest of us, the most wealthy of us, use and waste a majority of the resources, cause a great deal of global warming, but it's also the poorest of the poor around the world who often have little choice but to use not very environmentally sound ways to survive, just to survive, to cook their food, to heat their living structures, whatever those are, and by cutting down trees and so on. So unless we address this fundamental economic injustice, the world's poor getting poorer, the world's rich getting richer, all these problems that I mentioned, civil war and mass migrations of people and conflict, all these problems and terrorism will worsen and threaten the very future of the planet. So basically, in sum, what I'm saying is that we can't continue on as we are, or we will eventually destroy ourselves. So in addition to humanitarian concerns, that's why we need to share the food and the resources of the world more equitably, as Maitreya suggests we do.
And certainly that would be easy enough to do if there were the political and the human will to do that.
Absolutely. That's what it will take.
Yeah. And I think that, it's pretty sobering when we watch our television screens these days and see these floods of humanity. There but for God go I. You, I, and a lot of people that are living paycheck to paycheck, even in a rich country like the United States, can very easily relate to the stress and the strain of not being able to have those basic needs fulfilled.
It's true. I mean, we're all really, in essence, brothers and sisters of one humanity. And that's what Maitreya says, too. And that the reason really why we allow these things to happen, the poor getting poorer, the hungry around the world, this mass migration of people, we, like you were saying, we have the ability to remedy these problems. We just need the will to do it. But because we don't see each other as one family, as part of one big human family, we basically allow these horrendous situations to continue and to get worse. And so Maitreya really is here to help us see each other as we really are, which is one family.
Yeah, this reminds me of the book that I found out about Maitreya through is a publication that was called Messages from Maitreya the Christ that were given through Benjamin Creme at meetings at Friend's house in London in the early days of Maitreya's emergence. And at that point, one of these messages that deeply struck a chord in me was one that was given on September 12th, 1979, in which Maitreya said, "My coming evokes in man a desire for change, a desire for betterment, however express. My energies engender in man divine discontent. All that is useless in our structures must go. There are many such which are unworthy of man today. Man is an emerging God and thus requires the formation of modes of living which will allow this God to flourish." And I thought that was a very profound message, that we see ourselves as emerging gods. And how can we do that with so many of our brothers, fleeing for their lives, not being able to see their children live to the age of 2, and all of these other horrors that are going on?
Yes.
Yeah. So Maitreya must certainly have some ideas of what we should be doing about this. Can you give us some idea of what he's recommending?
Sure. Just to begin, he talks about why sharing is so important, why it's so needed in the world now, and why that's really the key to solving all of our critical global problems, and really the key to having a peaceful future for our planet. And he says, sharing is divine. When you share, you recognize God in your brother. And he will inspire us to see ourselves, as I was saying, as one family. And he will help us to see that all of the food, all of the resources of the world belong to everyone. And they don't belong to people who can afford to buy the food. They belong to everyone by divine right. And they're not for the use and misuse by a few who can afford them. And Maitreya says that if we don't share, there will never be economic and social justice in the world. And without justice, there will never be peace. And without peace, there will be no world, really, because we have weapons now of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, that can destroy the whole world. And if we have another worldwide war, those weapons would be used. But Maitreya says that war will not take place, and that he knows that we will make the needed changes, that will accept the need for sharing, if only because we have a few other alternatives available to us. So he knows that we will make the right choice and accept the principle of sharing. But it's up to us to do that.
Yeah. And as you know, he has a crash program in mind to aid the world's poorest nations. Do you want to give us a few details on that?
Sure. Yeah. So Maitreya will recommend a reordering of economic priorities so that adequate food and housing and education and medical care become universal rights. And the immediate priority for Maitreya will be the saving of the millions of people who are starving to death in the developing world. So he will, as you were saying, he'll propose a crash program of aid on a worldwide scale to alleviate the most intense of the suffering that's going on.
And how does he see that working out?
Well, sharing, if you think about the word in the truest sense, means that everyone contributes something. It's not just the world's wealthy giving to the world's poor. Every country, even the poorest, have an excess of some resource that's needed. So all of the countries of the world will be asked to put into a common pool, common trust, that which it has in excess of its needs. And there will be a UN agency set up for just this purpose, the redistribution of the world's resources according to need, so that all of the world's nations, all of the world's people have what they need to survive. But yeah. I do want to emphasize that none of these plans for sharing and the redistribution of the world's resources, none of this is going to happen without the people's consent. It's up to us, it's up to the world's people, to humanity, to accept this and other recommendations that Maitreya puts forward. It's really up to us, the world's people, to call on our leaders to implement these changes.
Which brings us back.
Otherwise, nothing is going to change.
Which brings us back to sharing equals justice equals peace. Join us on the other side of the break for more with Monte Leach.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Maitreya's Mission, the book by Benjamin Krem, is a riveting exploration of life ahead. It reveals how the world teacher, Maitreya, and other ancient guardians of the human race are emerging now and are showing us how to release our divine potential. Investigate for yourself at shareontheairradio.org. That's shareontheairradio.org. shareontheairradio.org.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday 2 p.m. Eastern as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
Simone Milicis would like you to know that business can be fun, which is why she wrote the book, Joy of Business. What if you could have the joy of business rather than the stress and struggle? Most of the time, the only thing stopping you from a thriving business is you. In the Joy of Business book, Simone gives you access consciousness tools and pragmatic ways to get out of your own way and to create the business, life, and living you know is possible and beyond what this reality says is achievable. Business is joy. It's creation. It's generative. It can be the adventure of living. You can purchase your copy of the book through Amazon or Joy of Business website, www.accessjoyofbusiness.com.
Hi, this is Angela Levesque, host of Entanglement Radio. Join me Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern for inspiring conversations with visionaries in spiritual science and conscious healing. Entanglement Radio, Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. Transcendent talk for the conscious mind.
Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Hello again, everyone. You are listening to Share International Radio here on OMTimes Radio. I'm Diana Gold Holland, your co-host this week, and I'm with guest Monte Leach, the U.S. editor of Share International magazine. Monty, we had tackled some pretty heavy issues just before the break. And another one that sticks out, of course, is the environmental issue and the crises we are facing now. What are Maitreya's views on that particular issue?
Well, of course, another one of his top priorities is saving, protecting, and the healing of the environment, because, as is, I think, evident to everyone, we're in a very serious environmental crisis worldwide. And the most important, the most serious aspect of this is global climate change. And on the encouraging side, I think more and more people are becoming aware of the urgency of the situation and are taking action, but still not enough action, not enough pressure is being brought to the world's political leaders, in my opinion. It's not enough to meet the dire need of the time, because according to scientific estimates, and which the Masters of Wisdom are actually in agreement with, we have only 10 years, or even actually less than 10 years, to prevent irreversible damage to the Earth and ourselves from global warming. And I just wanted to read a short quote from a Master of Wisdom that was published in Share International magazine. Every month, Benjamin Krem's master dictates an article to him, to the magazine, and I just wanted to read a short quote talking about the urgency of the environmental problems that we face and how the masters see this. So this is the quote from the Master of Wisdom. If we are to save the planet from the results of global warming, we must do infinitely more than is planned to limit carbon emissions, and in a shorter period of time than is generally accepted as necessary. Humanity has been slow to recognize the dangers, and even now many refuse to take the problem seriously. Such attitudes, there is no doubt, put in jeopardy the future of planet Earth. Humanity must change dramatically the present way of life and embrace simpler forms of living and working. So this is what a Master of Wisdom has said about the environmental problem. And in addition to global warming, there's another less publicized environmental issue that I think is certainly worth mentioning here, and that is the pollution, the toxic pollution of our environment, the toxic chemicals that we release into the air, the seas, the water each day, causing untold damage to the earth and to our own health. And actually a recent study said that 40% of all the world's deaths are attributable to some form of pollution. That's 40%. That's an enormous number. And
that is an enormous number. I mean, we see the images on our TV of the polluted streams and the gushing, nuclear silos and all that kind of thing. But 40%, I mean, that is a huge, huge number.
It is a huge number. I mean, a fair amount of that is air pollution. Smoke and fires that the very poor have to use to cook their food, and the pollution from the burning of the forests, like we're seeing in Indonesia now. That's causing a huge number of illnesses and death worldwide. And according to the masters, the worst form of pollution is actually nuclear radiation that is being released constantly from over 400 nuclear power plants that we have in operation around the world. And nuclear radiation is the worst form of pollution, according to the masters, because it not only profoundly affects human health and the environment, but it's also because our scientists don't even recognize the dangers of this radiation. They think if they can't measure the radiation, then it's not causing, or if it's at very low levels, it's not causing any problems. But according to the masters, even when these power plants are not emitting measurable amounts of radiation from a higher more sensitive level, they're causing huge damage to the environment and to our health. And from the master's point of view, all the nuclear power plants should be shut down immediately. That is a top priority of the Masters of Wisdom. And Maitreya will recommend that as well.
So I'm guessing that cancer, for example, would be very much linked into this.
I'm sorry, which would be?
Cancer.
Yes, I mean, cancer, Alzheimer's disease. I mean, Benjamin Creme has talked about this in Share International, that one of the reasons why the incidence of Alzheimer's disease is getting more prevalent in younger people is the radiation, the impact of radiation from these nuclear power plants that our scientists don't really even have the instruments to measure at this point. But it is adversely affecting our health, and it's having an impact across the board. And some medical scientists, such as the Australian scientist Helen Caldicott, has pointed out even that this nuclear radiation is having an impact at lower levels than we even think are dangerous. Mm-hmm. So, speaking from an environmental standpoint, we can't continue on as we are now as well, just as we can't continue on as we are from an economic standpoint. If we don't change direction, we will destroy the planet, and that's really why Maitreya is here, living among us now to inspire us to change direction, to share the world's food and the resources, to restore the environment so that we don't destroy ourselves, really.
Absolutely. Listeners, if you've just tuned in, you're listening to Share International Radio here on OMTimes Radio, and you can get a lot of background information and listen to previous archived shows on our website, shareontheairradio.org. We invite you to do that. It's shareontheairradio.org. Monte, I'd like to get back to, how we mobilize. And one thing that strikes me is these images of the people now taking to the streets en masse about, with climate marches and whatnot. Maitreya has talked about the power of the people and the rise in that power, which we're seeing quite dramatically. How about outlining some of that for us?
Sure. Well, the voice of the people is most certainly getting stronger, louder around the world. We see it all the time, and we report on it regularly in Share International magazine. Each month we have a section of the magazine called The Voice of the People, and it's devoted entirely to protests and rallies and marches that are happening throughout the world for various causes. People standing up for their rights to a living wage, to enough necessities of life, to people calling for a clean environment. And all of this is a reflection of a change of consciousness of humanity. This is reflecting the fact that humanity is becoming more aware. We're becoming more aware of the problems that we have, and that it's up to us to fix the problems. It's up to us to compel our leaders, the world's leaders, to fix our problems, that we can't wait for the leaders to do it on their own. We have to force them, push them to solve these problems. And these protests that are happening around the world are an indication that humanity is waking up. With the help of Maitreya and the masters, their energies pouring into the world is stimulating this wake-up of humanity. And we see this happening all around the world. One example I thought was a profound example, which happened last September. It was the largest ever climate march. And we had 2,700 simultaneous climate events that took place around the world. Over 1 million people took to the streets, more than 156 countries around the world, to demand action on climate change, on global warming. Yeah. It was an amazing experience to see all this happening last year.
Yeah, and the photos were quite dramatic. So on that line, Monte, what do you think the prognosis is for the UN Climate Summit happening, well, not very long from now in November in Paris?
Well, that's a big summit going on, and there's, some glimmers of hope that before the conference has taken place. The conference is scheduled to happen November and December, like you were saying, and 146 countries have sent in their plans for limiting carbon pollution, and that's never been done before. So there is a glimmer of hope that this conference will have a positive result, but what the governments of the world have committed to so far is not enough. It's a step in the right direction, but we need to do more. And to help push the governments to do more, there are rallies and protests planned all over the world in advance of the climate summit in Paris coming up. And a group that I think is spearheading these protests is a group called 350.org. I don't know if our listeners are aware of the group. It's 350.org, and they can find a rally or a protest march in their area coming up to call on the world leaders to do as much as they possibly can to limit global warming. So there's a glimmer of hope, but we need to keep pushing the leaders to do more.
And exactly, this is one very tangible way that people can get involved. They can vote with their feet. If this is something that's of interest to you, check out 350.org. Was that correct, Monte?
Right, it's 350.org, and
okay,
headed by a fellow named Bill McKibben, who is a well-known environmentalist and activist.
And there people can find out about the local climate march happening in their towns and cities. I know that we have a very impressive rally going on that will be going on here in Vancouver, and let's hope it gets the coverage it deserves. Come back to us again in segment 4 for Monte Leach, U.S. editor of Share International magazine, talking about what listeners can do.
Feed your soul with Waves of Consciousness on OMTimes Radio.
Every night, when the skies are clear, a remarkable event can be witnessed. A UFO the size of 5 football fields is moving through the skies just like a star. It pulses, it blinks, it changes color. This spacecraft appeared before as the Star of Bethlehem. Find out what it all means. Visit shareontheairradio.org. That's shareontheairradio.org.
Have you been searching for a perspective beyond the mainstream? Check it out. Join your hosts Cielito Pascual and Diana Gold Holland on Share International Radio for thought-provoking views behind the news, Sundays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio. You can also find us at shareontheairradio.org. This may be the message of hope you've been waiting for.
Are you trying to get from point A to point B and need a little advice? Connect with the counselors at OMTimes Advisors. Whether you're looking for a life coach or a spiritual intuitive, the advisors participating at advisors.omtimes.com were carefully chosen based on their gifts, skills, and professionalism. OMTimes Advisors, connecting you with the best advisors in the business.
Dr. Kevin here, and I want to invite you every Thursday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, to join me on the Dr. Kevin Show, where we have a diversity of guests who help you step outside the box, behind the curtain, and see what a load of crap is going on in the world today, so you have more information with which to make better decisions. We'll see you there. Namaste.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Share International Radio here on OMTimes Radio. Every Sunday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. We're back with our guest today, Monte Leach, the U.S. editor of Share International magazine. I just want to make one point clear, and that is that all of the information you're hearing today, much of it being thought-provoking views behind the news, which is our tagline, all of this is for your consideration only. If you can relate to this information, if it has the ring of truth for you, if it arouses your curiosity, by all means, we invite you to listen in every week with us. And we'd like to discuss in this segment things that you can do as listeners to help further Maitreya's priorities and recommendations if they sound true to you. Monte, let's get into that topic. What can people do?
Sure. Well, as we were saying just before the last break, one thing people could do that I'm sure most people are aware of that furthers Maitreya's priorities, which are providing people with enough food and shelter and health care and education in the world and the healing of our environment. Those are Maitreya's top priorities. And so anything you can do to support, to help make those things happen, you're helping Maitreya's work. And of course, one way to do that is to get involved in any kind of a nonprofit group and nonviolent action and rallies and in any way you can to support groups like 350.org and any other group you feel drawn to that are working in the environmental field, the field to help people with world hunger problems and poverty. Anything of service is helping Maitreya's to implement Maitreya's priorities. More specifically, in terms of the work of Share International, another way you can help is, as listeners, is to begin by finding out more information about what we've been talking about today. And a good place to start is the Share International website, which is share, share-international.org. And on that site, you'll find a lot of very interesting information that goes into much more depth than I could here today about what we've been talking about Maitreya's presence in the world, his priorities, what it means for the world now, and ways you can help. So I would encourage listeners who have an interest in this information to go up to the website and begin to educate themselves. That's how I began in this process of work, is I started reading everything I could about this information, and it really helped me in continuing on in this work. And part of this education is the magazine itself, which you'll find on the website too. At least you'll find just a brief sample of the magazine, Share International, each month. And I would also encourage readers to check out the excerpt that's on the website each month, and if they're interested, to subscribe to the magazine, because the magazine, as you were saying, Diana, it's all volunteer. There's no commercials, no ads, and it's read in more than 70 countries around the world. It's put together by volunteers all around the world.
And it's very, very high-level journalism. I mean, you really get very good and meaty information in this magazine. Of course, we do not take any ads in the magazine, which is another factor. It retains editorial, creative and editorial, what do you call this? Independence and oversight to do what it wants. And picking up on this, getting more information, Monte, I'd just like to add that I too started by reading everything I could get my hands on because this topic just rang so true to me. And that, of course, included reading the books of Benjamin Creme, chief editor of Share International magazine, who is also the author of something like 16 or 17 books now on Maitreya's priorities and his emergence. That's Benjamin Creme, as in C-R-E-M-E, as in creme de la creme. And if people go to the website, share-international.org, they will find there 4 books by Benjamin Creme that they can download free of charge. Aside from everything that is available, of course, through your regular book supply outlets. So I want to just stress that point that you made, Monte, of getting more information and then seeing how that's working out, how you are seeing this new awareness that is spreading and how that's working out in the world.
That's what you can see in Share International. It shows how Maitreya's priorities are working out in the world, and it gives an ongoing update in terms of the public emergence of Maitreya as he emerges more publicly into the world. And it's uniquely, it has an article each month by a Master of Wisdom, written by a Master of Wisdom, dictated to Benjamin Creme. And this is unique in my experience. I don't know of any other magazine in the world that has an article written each month by a Master of Wisdom. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And
another segment that I really like in the magazine are the letters to the editor, where people who have had actual encounters with Maitreya or another one of the Masters emerging now, write in these experiences, and they are confirmed by Benjamin Creme's master. They're just the most wonderful assortment of real-life experiences that happen to people and that are profoundly inspiring. Again, something you will read nowhere else.
It's true, and one other, maybe a couple other things to just, suggestions is, in addition to educating oneself, if our listeners, if you feel that what we're talking about has some element of truth to you, whether you believe it, 5%, 10%, whatever level you think it might be true, I would encourage you to share it with other people at that level that you think it might be true, and say, I heard these people on the radio talking about this really amazing story. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's really interesting, and it gave me a sense of hope. Because if you share this information at whatever level you believe it to be true, you're helping to raise the climate of hope in the world, and that's what Maitreya is encouraging us to do. Because if we know that we're not alone in the world, that we have help, that we have extraordinary spiritual help now in the world to help us solve our problems, this gives us a really stronger sense of hope for the future, and you can help do that by sharing this information with other people.
Absolutely. There are a couple of things that I would like you to speak about, Monte, simply because they're dear to my heart. Some of the inner work, the inner transformational work that people can be doing, is through a practice, again, being introduced now under the directions of the Masters of Wisdom, and that is transmission meditation. Why don't you say a little bit about that, Monte?
Yes, now this is another service activity that can be done by anyone, and it's called transmission meditation, as you were saying, Diana, and it's a group meditation that was introduced to the world by Benjamin Creme's master, a Master of Wisdom, way back in 1974, and it's now done by groups throughout the world. And it's done as a service to humanity, which makes it somewhat different than other types of meditation, which are personal meditations that we might do, and you can still do them and still participate in transmission meditation. But this is a group meditation that's done as a service to the world, and how it's done is that the masters send their powerful spiritual energies through those who take part in the transmission meditation, and the masters send their energies out to the world wherever they are most needed at the time. And the transmission groups act as kind of electric substations, stepping down these great energies so that they're more readily usable, more readily available to humanity. And it's really these great spiritual energies that are helping to change the world for the better. They're helping to wake up humanity. We're talking about humanity waking up. Well, these energies that the masters are sending into the world and being helped with by the transmission groups around the world, these energies are helping to change the world, to raise the consciousness of humanity. And
Monty?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Monty. I love it, but you know what? We're basically out of time. Monty, we barely scratched the surface. Would you come back next week and continue our discussion?
Sure, I'd be happy to. That'd be great.
Okay, thank you. Let me just sign off here with an announcement in closing to our audience. My co-host, Cielito Pascual, will be at the Share International booth at the Body, Mind, Spirit Expo in Portland, Oregon next Saturday and Sunday. That's November 7th and 8th. If you visit booth 211, you can learn more about the topics that we cover on our show. And then that Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. in room 4, there'll be a presentation on UFOs and our spiritual awakening. And again at 4 p.m. on transmission meditation. So check out our Facebook page, Share International Radio, for details. That's the Share International booth at the Body, Mind, Spirit Expo next weekend at the Oregon Convention Center in Portland. Again, I want to invite you to check out our website. You'll find lots of goodies there in terms of many of the themes that we talk about. That's shareontheairradio.org, SHARE, ontheairradio.org. See you again next Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, when guest Monte Leach will join us again to continue our discussions. Thank you, Monty. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And a good week to all. Signing off for now. Bye.